The office felt different today. Even before I stepped past the glass doors, I sensed the subtle hum of unspoken preferences in the air. Ben walked ahead of me, his posture tight, careful. Every glance from a colleague lingered too long on his sibling, every nod seemed weighed with a hidden favor. I watched him navigate the corridors, a quiet tension trailing behind him, unacknowledged but not unnoticed. The way his eyes flicked to a whispering cluster by the coffee machine, the slight hesitation before he approached a meeting room, all of it spoke volumes of the invisible hierarchy imposed not by merit but by familiarity. A junior colleague, unaware of her own biases, mirrored the same dismissive gestures Ben had experienced at family dinners, as if the microaggressions had migrated into the professional sphere. His isolation wasn't dramatic, it was insidious, growing with each slight, each misattributed accomplishment. And yet he remained calm, internalizing, calculating, letting the world think him composed while a quiet storm gathered beneath his surface. He remembered the effort he had poured into projects last week, ignored, now reflected back as subtle marginalization. The echo of earlier dismissals reverberated in his mind as he adjusted his jacket, readying for yet another round of polite smiles and constrained conversation. Memories surfaced as he settled into his chair in the small conference room. Past career milestones flashed across his mind, moments when recognition was withheld, when applause went to another, when family and office hierarchies had aligned to overlook him. He could see the parallels now. A parent praising a sibling for minor achievements mirrored by a supervisor favoring another employee for routine tasks. Ben's frustration was quiet, simmering beneath the surface, carefully restrained to maintain professionalism. He measured each interaction, noting the discrepancies, cataloging them mentally for later. The pattern was unmistakable. He was capable yet invisible, a truth that had shadowed him from childhood through his professional life. His internal strategy had already begun: observe, note, withhold confrontation. In the rhythm of office life, this quiet vigilance became a lifeline, a subtle assertion of control where direct challenge would only invite dismissal. By mid-afternoon, the tensions began to crystallize. In a minor meeting, one of his colleagues, his sibling present as usual, claimed credit for an idea Ben had painstakingly developed. The room didn't notice, of course. The claim was quiet, understated, the slight disguised as casual conversation. Ben's face remained composed, his tone even, but his mind cataloged every word, every glance, every omission. Emails and notes were quietly gathered as evidence, each one a testament to the injustice unfolding in real time. A subtle, almost imperceptible humiliation had crept into the room, leaving him both angry and resolutely silent. Later, an offhand comment from his family member delivered with casual confidence undercut his recent achievements, a private jab disguised in everyday conversation. The mixture of restrained anger and determination solidified in his chest. The emotional landscape was tense, each small conflict a spark in the tinderbox of long-standing grievances, every interaction another brushstroke in the larger picture of the looming confrontation. As the afternoon wore on, Ben began to develop a strategy. His mind ran through mental checklists, timing, evidence, potential allies, and the subtle social currents he could manipulate without exposing himself prematurely. He confided in small moments to a mentor, someone who recognized both the injustice and the careful restraint required. They spoke quietly in the corner of the office, discussing observation tactics, potential outcomes, and the patience necessary to reclaim what had been denied. He rehearsed internally, anticipating responses, testing arguments and counterpoints silently. There was a subtle humor in the process, an acknowledgement of the absurdity of being overlooked while performing admirably. It was a calm, deliberate preparation, the kind of internal work that would allow him to navigate the coming challenges without losing composure. Each calculation, each rehearsal, laid the groundwork for the higher-stakes confrontations that would arrive in the next chapter. Late in the afternoon, as the office hummed with the quiet buzz of routine tasks, Ben stumbled upon a detail that had eluded him until now. A small, overlooked piece of information, an email chain, an altered document, a misattributed note, hinted at a shift in the balance of power, subtle but potentially decisive. His pulse quickened slightly, not with panic, but with clarity. "I will not be overlooked again," he thought, a quiet affirmation that solidified resolve into action. The revelation, small in appearance, carried immense weight, altering the trajectory of the conflicts that had been simmering since his arrival. And just when I thought it was safe to sit quietly, a message arrived that changed everything, leaving the air taut with anticipation and the sense that the next steps would require both intelligence and courage. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the polished conference room floor. Ben sat quietly at the head of the table, a stack of papers in front of him, his fingers drumming lightly. The microaggressions from earlier in the week weighed heavily in his mind, each slight an echo of a deeper pattern he'd been tracking. A colleague had laughed a little too hard at his sibling's offhand comment, nodding as if in agreement with an unspoken hierarchy that Ben refused to acknowledge aloud. He reviewed emails, notes, and meeting minutes, connecting dots that others had missed or ignored. It was all there, the subtle favoritism, the quiet misattributions, the undercurrent of family influence stretching into professional spaces. He didn't fume outwardly. He calculated, observed, and filed each incident mentally, a meticulous archive building toward a plan of measured confrontation. As the meeting progressed, a familiar pattern emerged. Twist S5 revealed itself when a family member deliberately misrepresented Ben's recent work in front of peers, claiming ideas that were undeniably his as casual suggestions from their own experience. The room hesitated, a few colleagues exchanging uncertain glances, but no one spoke. Ben remained composed, nodding in acknowledgement, carefully measuring each reaction. Internally, he traced the motivations and anticipated outcomes, ensuring that any overt response would not compromise his position. He had learned early in life that restraint could be a form of strategy. Observing the subtle power plays, Ben recognized the blend of office politics and family dynamics, the way one reinforced the other. Isolation tinged his awareness, but it sharpened his focus, and he reminded himself that patience and insight would be his allies. Later, alone in the adjacent hallway, he reviewed a document that had been circulating with unclear attribution. Twist S6 emerged. An achievement he had rightfully earned had been miscredited to another. His pulse quickened slightly, not from panic but from the realization that reclaiming this recognition would require precision. He ran through mental scenarios, the right moment to present evidence, colleagues who might support his claim, potential reactions from family members. The balance between ethics and justice occupied his thoughts. He knew that any misstep could be used against him. Rehearsing dialogues, imagining counter-arguments, he positioned himself strategically, ensuring that his eventual confrontation would be firm but controlled. The simmering anger under his calm exterior was fuel, not recklessness. Ben's mentor called him into a quiet corner office, a space removed from prying eyes and ears. Their conversation was measured, thoughtful, guiding Ben to connect past slights with present injustices. Humor occasionally slipped into the discussion, a subtle reminder that intelligence could coexist with restraint. The mentor offered perspectives on timing, influence, and the importance of evidence, emphasizing that recognition gained through skill and patience carried more weight than any impulsive declaration. Ben absorbed each word, visualizing a path forward, understanding that regaining respect and acknowledgement would require both strategy and composure. These discussions anchored him, reminding him that he wasn't alone, even if the office and family hierarchy seemed aligned against him. As the day edged toward evening, Ben received a message that made his stomach tighten. It was unexpected, revealing layers of manipulation he hadn't anticipated, suggesting that the forces against him were deeper and more calculated than he had thought. The combination of shock and resolve set his mind racing. He knew that his next steps would define the trajectory of both professional and personal dynamics. Every previous observation, every collected note, every rehearsed response coalesced into a single mental directive: act with precision, reveal truth without hesitation, and maintain the moral high ground. The tension in the office seemed to thicken, walls closing in, while Ben's resolve solidified. He was ready, patient but poised, aware that a single calculated move could shift the entire balance of power. The undercurrents of hidden agendas had surfaced, and for the first time, he felt prepared to navigate the storm they promised. Late afternoon sunlight stretched through the office windows, softening the harsh lines of fluorescent light with a golden haze. I lingered at my desk, pen poised over a notebook, reviewing subtle patterns I had observed over the past weeks. The overlooked achievements, the sly glances, and the whispered approvals for someone else. It was all there, waiting for careful documentation. I jotted down behaviors, emails, and overheard conversations, piecing together a silent map of the power dynamics that had gone unnoticed by everyone else. Each note reinforced the same truth. Talent alone was not enough to guarantee recognition. I had to move strategically, blending restraint with insight and patience with a readiness to act when the moment demanded. The tension in the office was like a low hum, vibrating just beneath polite smiles and casual chatter, waiting for the right spark. Then, unexpectedly, I came across an email buried in the thread of routine correspondence, Twist S7. The message outlined deliberate exclusions and manipulations orchestrated by a colleague with familial ties, a calculated attempt to undermine me without drawing direct attention. Shock hit first, followed by disbelief, but it was quickly replaced with a simmering anger that I kept firmly in check. My fingers traced the lines of the email, absorbing the implications without a word escaping. I considered every potential response, weighing each against possible exposure of vulnerability. This was a game of subtle power and careful timing, and I knew that an impulsive reaction could ruin every chance I had of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. My mind raced through past disappointments, the small slights that had been ignored, and yet each one now provided guidance for my next move. I began to outline a plan in the quiet of my office corner, considering timing, audience, and allies who might support my efforts without exposing their loyalty prematurely. Mental rehearsal became a steady rhythm, imagining conversations, predicting responses, envisioning the subtle shifts in power that would occur with each calculated action. The strategy was deliberate, rooted in intelligence rather than impulsivity, tempered by the lessons of prior frustrations. I reminded myself that small victories, even unnoticed by others, were essential to maintaining morale and focus. There was no room for reckless confrontation. The stakes were too high, and the board was crowded with players who thrived on distraction and misdirection. Every step had to be measured, every reaction anticipated. Later, I met with a trusted colleague over coffee, a mentor who had seen similar dynamics play out over decades. Their insight offered both perspective and validation. We spoke quietly, balancing strategy with ethics, discussing the potential consequences of each move. The conversation reinforced my observations, confirming that what I had noted was not paranoia, but a genuine, systemic pattern of favoritism and manipulation. Encouraged, I realized that acting decisively did not mean acting rashly. Intelligence, careful timing, and ethical grounding could coexist with assertiveness. Humor crept into our dialogue occasionally, a reminder that patience and strategy did not have to strip away all lightness. I left the cafe feeling grounded, my determination sharpened, my strategy validated. As early evening fell and the office emptied, a subtle shift caught my attention, a message that suggested my carefully laid plans might already be under scrutiny, Twist S8. My pulse quickened, a mixture of tension and alertness settling in my chest. I had anticipated challenges, but the immediacy of this new development forced rapid adjustments. Every move, every plan had to be reconsidered in light of this new information. I felt the weight of the game pressing down, but instead of panic, a heightened clarity emerged. The stakes were real, the consequences immediate, and I was determined to navigate them with intelligence and calm. Every subtle glance, every hushed conversation became a signal to read, interpret, and respond strategically. The quiet resistance that had defined my approach until now had to evolve into precise, calculated action, ready for the challenges that awaited in the next phase. The late afternoon sun slanted across the boardroom table, highlighting the edge of each document, the slight tremor in the corners of emails that had gone unread for far too long. I sat quietly reviewing the notes I had accumulated over weeks, emails, private conversations, small victories ignored, and contributions dismissed. Each line of text reminded me that the landscape of office and family politics was treacherous, littered with invisible traps and microaggressions that others barely noticed. Frustration bubbled under my skin, but I kept it contained, channeling that energy into a careful assessment of each opportunity. Every movement had to be deliberate, every word weighed. Acting impulsively could undo weeks of preparation, and patience was now a tool as vital as intelligence. Then unexpectedly, an insight arrived. Twist S9. A mentor reached out with a casual observation that revealed a loophole I hadn't considered, a connection overlooked by those seeking to sideline me. It was subtle, almost incidental, but the implications were profound. My initial reaction was surprise, tinged with cautious optimism, the kind that comes when a door opens quietly after months of closed walls. I considered how best to use this knowledge without appearing vulnerable, calculating the first steps that would set my intentions into motion while keeping my hand close to my chest. It was a chance to reclaim visibility, to correct misattributions, and subtly assert my presence without tipping the board too soon. I began making the first strategic moves, small yet deliberate. I highlighted my contributions in passing conversations, dropped carefully phrased clarifications in meetings, and made sure that the evidence of my work was visible to the right eyes without seeming self-serving. Each action was measured, designed to reclaim recognition, while testing reactions from colleagues and family members alike. Observing their responses, I gauged both validation and resistance. The sense of empowerment that came from this quiet assertion was tempered by the awareness that these steps were only the beginning. Pride and tension intertwined as I navigated the delicate balance between visibility and overexposure, careful not to trigger defensive mechanisms before my groundwork had fully taken hold. I wasn't immune to missteps. A colleague, perhaps sensing the subtle shift, attempted to undermine one of my early moves, twist S10. A minor misattribution, a quiet dismissal, left me momentarily irritated and questioning whether I had misjudged the timing. But the brief flash of self-doubt was quickly replaced by measured reflection. I noted the pushback, adjusted my approach, and incorporated the lesson into the next stage of my plan. Resilience and calculated intelligence became my shields, reminding me that setbacks were not failures, but opportunities to refine strategy. This small disruption reinforced my resolve, showing that careful observation and patience were far more powerful than impulsive confrontation. As the day waned and shadows lengthened across the office floor, a sense of heightened alertness settled over me. It was then I realized that someone had been watching, anticipating my moves in ways I hadn't fully accounted for. The knowledge hit with a spike of tension, a sudden awareness that the game was more complex than I had anticipated. Every action, every subtle maneuver would now need to account for this unseen presence. The stakes had shifted. My first moves were no longer merely experiments, they were the opening acts of a more intricate confrontation. The evening hum of the office seemed charged with unspoken anticipation, each empty chair and muted computer screen a reminder that observation was constant. My mind raced with adjustments, and yet, amid the tension, a quiet determination solidified. I would act strategically, decisively, and with the patience born of understanding the board too well to be caught unprepared. The early evening light slanted through the blinds of my office, casting long shadows across the polished surfaces of desks and the faint hum of air conditioning. I leaned back in my chair, letting my eyes trace the patterns of the day, the small victories, the subtle assertions that had begun to shift the atmosphere around me. Each minor confrontation, each carefully measured correction of misattributed credit, had become a stepping stone, a quiet accumulation of leverage. I noted the subtle reactions from colleagues, the fleeting glances, the small hesitations when family members spoke, and realized the power of observation. Anticipation built steadily within me, not the reckless energy of impulsivity, but a measured confidence that came from knowing the terrain, understanding the players, and seeing the cracks that would become opportunities. Every move required calculation, every word considered, for even a slight misstep could unravel the delicate balance I was cultivating. Then, twist S11 arrived with the slightest ripple, a minor escalation in the form of a subtle acknowledgement in a meeting, a phrase I had carefully inserted that highlighted a contribution previously ignored. The effect was immediate. Eyes flicked toward me, some with curiosity, others with cautious scrutiny. A colleague or family member faltered just enough to betray their discomfort, and a quiet sense of satisfaction washed over me. Pride mixed with caution, the attention was rising, and with it, the stakes. I felt the exhilaration of controlled action, the thrill of seeing strategy take root without exposing myself to unnecessary risk. The office environment, usually a maze of careful maneuvering, began to feel like a chessboard where my calculated assertions were steadily altering the positions of pieces, forcing reactions I could anticipate and leverage. Recognizing the value of allies, I began subtly strengthening my network, noting those who had consistently recognized competence over bias. Each interaction became a test of loyalty, a measure of trustworthiness, and a way to gauge who might serve as a discreet supporter in future confrontations. Conversations were measured, with layered meanings, a nod here, a casual affirmation there, each gesture quietly reinforcing mutual understanding. Small, coordinated maneuvers were planned in my mind, actions that could shift perception gradually, making my competence visible while maintaining discretion. Empowerment grew from these interactions, a cautious optimism that fed into every subsequent decision. Every acknowledgement, every supportive glance was a reminder that subtle influence could ripple outward, creating change without the noise of confrontation. But the environment was not without its pushback. Twist S12 manifested in the form of subtle undermining, a misattributed idea, a minor miscommunication, a quiet attempt to diminish credibility. Frustration rose, but it was tempered by measured reflection. Each act of resistance provided information, revealing the tactics others employed to maintain control. My internal debate focused on ethics and moral boundaries, how to protect my interests without compromising principles. The emotional weight of frustration, tempered with determination, fueled a clear, calculated response. Maintaining the moral high ground was as important as any tactical gain, and it shaped the careful recalibration of each subsequent move. Intelligence and restraint became intertwined, a guiding principle in navigating both the personal and professional dimensions of the challenge before me. As night approached, the subtle strikes of the day coalesced into a sense of heightened stakes. The realization struck me that someone had been monitoring my moves, perhaps anticipating them, and that the carefully constructed strategies were under observation. A spike of tension surged through me, but it was harnessed into sharpened focus. Each step forward now carried weight, the potential for both advancement and exposure intertwined. Awareness of the hidden scrutiny brought a new layer of urgency, demanding vigilance and precise timing. I reviewed my mental checklist once more, assessing contingencies, anticipating responses, and plotting adjustments. The path ahead was no longer just about reclaiming recognition. It was a tightrope above a room of hidden daggers, where one misstep could have consequences far beyond my current calculations. Every move now required meticulous attention, every gesture deliberate, and every decision weighed against unseen eyes. The tension was palpable, but so was the resolve. I was no longer merely responding to the environment. I was shaping it, quietly and strategically, ready for the challenges that the next chapter would undoubtedly bring. The night had settled in over Houston, casting long shadows through the office windows and spilling across the polished floors of the family estate. I paused at the threshold of the boardroom, allowing the quiet to settle around me, tracing the subtle patterns of power that had become clearer with each day's observations. Looking back over the past weeks, I saw the flaws in my earlier approaches, how reactive strategies and measured responses, while necessary, had only maintained a fragile balance rather than securing true agency. A sense of self-awareness sharpened, mingling with a faint frustration at my own previous hesitations. Yet beneath it all, determination burned stronger than ever. I resolved to move from responding to shaping outcomes, planning long-term strategies rather than waiting for the next slight or misattributed success. Growth was evident. I no longer accepted being sidelined. The transition from passive endurance to proactive maneuvering was well underway. Then came Twist S13, subtle but undeniable. A hidden betrayal revealed itself. An ally turned quietly against me. The evidence arrived in a seemingly innocuous email that I had almost overlooked, a message that exposed duplicity and underhanded manipulation. The shock hit, followed quickly by a swirl of anger and the delicate balance of internal conflict. I weighed retaliation against strategic restraint, conscious of the consequences of a hasty move. My mind raced through scenarios, recalling earlier echoes of being underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. The betrayal was more than personal. It threatened the careful momentum I had cultivated. Tension rose, but within it, clarity emerged. Recognizing the pattern and scope of deceit allowed me to calibrate a response that would be both deliberate and effective, transforming outrage into calculated opportunity. I spent hours mapping the terrain, mentally rehearsing every interaction, every potential consequence. Strategic planning became a meticulous process, aligning timing, observation, and allies with opportunities that might emerge. Those who had shown reliability in previous subtle tests now formed the backbone of a quiet network, their support crucial yet unassuming. I considered the habits, vulnerabilities, and predictable reactions of those who had tried to manipulate the environment, calculating how to leverage insight without exposing myself to unnecessary risk. Empowerment grew through the certainty of intelligence applied deliberately rather than through impulsive action. Anticipation sharpened each step, creating a sense of cautious optimism as I prepared for moves that could shift the balance in my favor without tipping the board too soon. Twist S14 soon tested this careful strategy. Opposition attempted to provoke a misstep, to manipulate me into a rash reaction that could undermine credibility or moral standing. Their provocations were subtle, a misworded comment, a strategically placed document, a glance that carried accusation and expectation. I paused, feeling the internal tug of justice and the desire to respond immediately. But restraint guided my hand. Ethical boundaries became as important as tactical advantage, and every contemplated action was measured against long-term credibility. A simmering satisfaction underpinned the tension, the realization that I could act decisively, maintain integrity, and still command the narrative. Focus sharpened, blending moral clarity with strategic advantage, and a quiet satisfaction emerged from the recognition that intelligence and patience often wielded more power than immediate reaction. By the late hours, the atmosphere had shifted. Every move, every carefully calculated interaction now felt laden with potential consequences. I sensed the gravity of the upcoming decisions, the culmination of observation, planning, and subtle maneuvering. The stakes were higher, and the shadows cast by those who watched, anticipated, or miscalculated their own influence grew longer. With deliberate attention, I reviewed contingencies, reassessed alliances, and mentally rehearsed responses to scenarios both expected and unforeseen. The thrill of calculated risk mingled with the sobering awareness that a single misstep could undo weeks of careful positioning. Yet the determination remained unshaken. I was prepared, aware, and quietly commanding the board. Each moment was charged with the anticipation of the decisive turn, the kind that could redefine the landscape entirely, ensuring that when the confrontation arrived, it would be executed on my terms. The late afternoon sun cast an amber glow across the corporate boardroom, highlighting the polished surfaces and muted expressions of those seated around the table. I spread out every piece of evidence I had meticulously gathered over weeks. Emails, meeting notes, subtle hints of favoritism, and traces of manipulation. Each detail confirmed the suspicions that had been building quietly in the background. Family betrayal intertwined with professional undermining. The air seemed heavier as I reviewed the patterns, feeling the simmering tension curl beneath my ribs, anticipation mingling with anxiety. Every glance from my allies hinted at outcomes I could not yet predict. I weighed the potential consequences of a public confrontation against a private resolution, my mind spinning with options, contingencies, and strategies. The intensity was palpable, and every heartbeat drew me closer to the moment I had been preparing for, a careful balance between restraint and decisive action, where one wrong move could unravel everything. Then came Twist S15, an unexpected revelation that shifted everything. A message, seemingly ordinary, revealed a hidden double deal, exposing manipulation by someone I had trusted implicitly. Shock cut through the calculated calm I had maintained, and anger flared beneath the surface. The betrayal was undeniable, yet the timing demanded measured control. My mind raced through potential responses, retaliation versus strategic restraint, and I recognized that the power of this moment lay in precise execution, not raw emotion. The new information changed the landscape, demanding immediate recalibration of my plan. I could feel the subtle recalibration of relationships, the unspoken alliances, and the hidden adversaries aligning themselves in response. The stakes had risen sharply, and the next move required not just cleverness, but the courage to confront entrenched deception head-on. Twist S16 arrived with the confrontation itself. I called the primary antagonist into a meeting, my posture composed, my voice calm, but each word carefully chosen to expose misappropriated accomplishments and the tangled web of hidden agendas. Lies were unraveled, subtle manipulations revealed, and the room held its breath. Colleagues who had remained silent now shifted uncomfortably, some offering subtle support without overtly betraying their own position. I maintained control, presenting the facts with clarity and moral authority. The room's atmosphere charged, emotions ran high, yet I stayed grounded, allowing reason to guide every response. My controlled fury, paired with careful logic, carved a space for vindication without sacrificing credibility. Shock spread across faces, satisfaction pulsed quietly within me, and the moral clarity of my position became undeniable. The climax escalated with twist S17, where public and symbolic vindication sealed the confrontation. Through a carefully orchestrated reveal, I corrected the perception of my contributions, ensuring recognition was both visible and indisputable. The strategic timing amplified the impact. Colleagues, family members, and allies witnessed the culmination of my calculated maneuvers. Relief and empowerment surged, tempered by the recognition of the careful orchestration required to maintain long-term respect. It was a moment of triumph, not just for justice served, but for the reaffirmation of agency and intelligence. The emotional high, the satisfaction of seeing truth and skill acknowledged, rippled through the room, leaving a palpable sense of finality, while also foreshadowing lingering threads yet to resolve. Echoes of past struggles resonated, tying every lesson, every slight, into this decisive moment. As the evening settled over the city, a reflective calm descended alongside the adrenaline of victory. Despite the clear triumph, I recognized remaining vulnerabilities, unseen fractures, and the subtle challenges that would persist even after this confrontation. The exhilaration of strategic success mingled with the sober awareness that the work of maintaining integrity, influence, and respect was ongoing. I allowed myself a brief, quiet acknowledgement of what had been achieved, preparing mentally for the steps that would follow in the final chapter. Even after this storm, I understood that the calm would demand a new kind of courage, one that was as much about vigilance and wisdom as it was about strength. The boardroom emptied, shadows lengthened, and I remained poised and aware, ready for what the next phase would bring. Evening had settled over Houston, casting long shadows across the family estate as I walked through rooms that once held tension and whispered grievances. The aftermath of the confrontation lingered, subtle but undeniable. Family members reacted in varied ways, some with genuine remorse, others with lingering resentment that no amount of revelation could instantly erase. I felt relief mingled with a cautious optimism, aware that the path forward required patience and discernment. Each interaction offered a reflection of how far I had come, a quiet acknowledgement of resilience and self-worth that had grown from countless small battles and overlooked achievements. The tangible consequences of previous actions now resonated without exaggeration. Nothing was staged, yet everything carried weight. Sitting in the familiar quiet of my office, I allowed myself a few moments to absorb the complexity of resolution, feeling the simmering tension gradually release while understanding the work of healing had only begun. Twist S18 arrived as a final, reinforcing revelation. An unexpected message, quietly delivered, confirmed restitution and acknowledgement of my contributions, a long overdue recognition that had once seemed impossible. The validation carried both emotional and moral closure, a symbolic return of dignity and affirmation of intelligence and strategy. I absorbed the satisfaction quietly, reflecting on the patience and calculated persistence it had taken to reach this point. Each piece of evidence, each carefully planned step, had culminated in this acknowledgement, reinforcing the value of strategic thinking married to measured action. It was not just a personal victory, but an affirmation of principles. Resilience, patience, and integrity could shape outcomes as surely as confrontation and clever maneuvering. The process of healing with family began slowly, each conversation a careful negotiation of trust and understanding. Some relationships mended, tentative bridges rebuilt over shared acknowledgement of past missteps, while others remained strained, their fractures visible, yet respected. I navigated these moments with empathy and cautious trust, recognizing that reconciliation was neither linear nor guaranteed, but possible when grounded in honesty and mutual recognition. Emotional maturity guided every interaction, allowing space for acknowledgement without forcing immediate forgiveness. The nuances of these exchanges revealed that overcoming betrayal was a layered, deliberate process, where boundaries and self-respect remained intact, while empathy allowed for measured connection. As the night deepened, I turned attention to new opportunities. Personal and professional growth beckoned, and the lessons learned empowered me to pursue them with clarity and confidence. Leadership roles, mentoring, and initiating projects that had previously been sidelined now seemed accessible. The optimism was not naive. It was earned through experience, strategy, and careful observation. Each step forward carried the weight of past trials, but also the clarity of purpose born from them. I recognized that triumph did not erase past pain, but transformed it into a compass, guiding decisions, strengthening resolve, and fostering new avenues of influence and agency. The evolution from the underestimated youngest child to a capable, respected figure was now tangible, reflected in the subtle nods of colleagues and the respectful deference of family members. Finally, in quiet reflection, I acknowledged the broader lessons. Loyalty was complex, integrity demanded vigilance, and resilience required constant cultivation. The journey had not been simple, yet the trials had sculpted a sense of perspective and self-reliance that no external challenge could diminish. As I looked out at the twinkling city lights, a sense of calm mingled with anticipation for the future. I had reclaimed my place, asserted my agency, and navigated the labyrinth of deceit and oversight. Yet the journey to truly trust again was only beginning. Every choice, every boundary, every relationship would require vigilance, wisdom, and courage moving forward. In that stillness, I felt the quiet satisfaction of hard-earned growth, the promise of new beginnings, and the steady pulse of life continuing beyond the storms I had endured. 3 weeks. That's how long it's been since the lights dimmed on that stage and the truth cracked through the polished facade of our family. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I just moved. A new apartment, nothing extravagant. 1 bedroom, creaky floors, view of the marina that catches the morning sun like a slow apology. No more marble countertops. No more silver-framed lies staring back at me from mantles, just space to breathe. Each morning I walk, no music, no noise, just me and the sound of seagulls and boat masts clinking in rhythm. I journal, not for anyone else, just to see my thoughts out loud, and they're clearer now, not softer, but clearer. There's no switch that flips when pain stops. It just stretches out until you realize one day it's not leading anymore. I wrote this line yesterday. They tried to define me with one word. I rewrote it into a sentence, and I meant it. The world, oddly, had something to say too. The wedding clip, viral. Of course it did. A polished man torn down by his own voice. It's made for internet theater. Strangers wrote to me. Emails from Kansas, voice memos from New York, even a handmade card from a church group in Alabama. People I hadn't heard from in decades reached out. Not with pity, no. With recognition, respect. And then there was the letter. No return address. Just a neat, almost formal script I hadn't seen since childhood birthday cards. It was her, Varnessa. No signature, but I'd know her choice of paper anywhere. She said she was sorry for what was allowed to grow in silence. I folded it once and slid it into the drawer. Some closures don't need responses. They just need silence to settle in. Gavin didn't get silence. He got press. Investigation, suspension, headlines. Uncle Orrin took over the company, interim but firm, cut Gavin out of board votes, froze his accounts, called in auditors. Legal proceedings started quickly. I gave my testimony, short and factual. But nothing more. Gavin messaged me. Wanted a final conversation. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because I was finished. Forgiveness isn't a spotlight moment. Sometimes it's the quiet walk in the opposite direction and never looking back. A few days ago, I sat at my usual cafe, same spot, same cup of coffee that always goes cold. A woman walked in, sharp suit, grace like gravity. She sat down uninvited, but not unwelcome. She introduced herself, said she was the silent investor behind Gavin's startup, said she watched the footage. "You remind me of who I used to be," she said. Then she reached into her bag and placed a key on the table. Old brass, familiar. "The estate," she said. "The one your family stripped from you. I bought it. It's yours now. You earned it twice over." My fingers didn't move for a long while. When they did, I wasn't shaking. I took the key, nodded once, and blinked back tears. Not from pain, from peace. The kind that sneaks up on you after years of chaos. Full circle. I went back. To that house, not to reclaim anything, but to begin something. I started small, hosting support circles in the living room. Women like me, overlooked, undervalued. starting again. We drink coffee, share stories, pass tissues, and laugh. Honest, guttural laughter that comes from knowing you survived. I started recording my voice. Nothing fancy, just a mic and an old desk. Talking to people who might need the truth the way I once did. Episode 1 ends with this line. They called me a rat. I built an empire from the shadows. Last night, as I arranged chairs for a weekend session, the doorbell rang. I didn't expect anyone. I opened it. And the person on the other side? Let's just say this story isn't quite over yet.